Okay, excellent. Trevor, it's great to be back. It's great to be back. We have a lot to talk about. We spent some time last time we were together talking about what was going on with the Aron. The Aron was particularly fascinating in that what the Aron represented was almost the folding in of all space-time and reality to Ratzon Hashem, and then all things just fell apart in front of it. I saw recently, and I'll put the Maramakomis on the website as well. The Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bachya point out to Rabbeinu Bachya in Parshas Truma that the lashon of Aaron is interesting. What does Aaron literally mean? So we translate it as ark, right? So Rabbeinu Bachya points out that the lashon Aaron is milashon or. Or. That's the letters of or. Hey, nun for another time, but it's a lashon of or. It is the light of Hashem revealed in this world. That is the Aaron. We're going to come back to the idea of the Aaron a little bit later, because as the Kohanim step into the Yarden, so the Yarden stops. The Yarden stops, and the way that the pasuk describes it is like it piles up in this big heap. The water ceases to flow down river. The water that is there just carries on going, and there is a break within the Yarden, and the water just piles up. Doesn't flow any further. This, at least according to half of the school of thought amongst the Mefarshim, is pshat in the pasuk. What David HaMelech says, "Until Hayarden Yisav Le'achar," right? That the Yarden turns backwards. Yarden Yisav Le'achar, which is talking about B'tzeis Yisrael in Mitzrayim. So what does Hayarden Yisav Le'achar have to do with that? So there are two schools of thought. One school of thought is Hayarden Yisav Le'achar. The waters of the Jordan River, just like all other waters in the world, ceased their normative activity. So the Yarden also did at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The other school of thought amongst the Rishonim is Hayarden Yisav Le'achar, is that the continuation of Yetzias Mitzrayim is crossing the Yarden. Right? That's when we crossed through Yam Suf. This is the continuation of that process. I mean, there was a 40-year hiatus in the desert, but this is the end of that process, right? B'tzeis Yom Mitzrayim, etc., Hayam Rav, Hayamas, and Hayarden Yisav Le'achar with 40 years in between. Right? There was a story with the Yam, it's Yam Suf, Yarden, that's the Yarden. There's a lot to think about. I suppose the throwaway question is, why doesn't it split? Right? Why does it stop? Meaning, why is that this particular miracle? Right? One would anticipate, our experience with bodies of water doing miraculous things so far. Case 1 of 1 was split. The Yarden doesn't split. The Yarden piles up, meaning it ceases to flow. It stops.
A simple answer is because the Yam Suf was a static body, and so it's a particle trip, you split it, whereas the Yarden flows, and so there isn't really a natural correlate of splitting something that flows. Instead, you stop the flow.
I mean, yes, although the sea also, to a certain extent, flows, right?
Not in any particular direction, I guess.
Right, meaning, yes, which is why that's the throwaway question, although you'll see that there's tremendous amkus to this. But in order to understand this, we have to understand what the Yarden is, because the Yarden shows up many times in our Chumash. Yaakov refers to the Yarden, Ki b'makli avarti es hayarden. V'ata hayisi yishnei machanos. I crossed over the Yarden with my stick. Now I've turned into 2 camps. So Yarden, right? When he comes back across the Yarden. Yarden is mentioned as the eastern border of Eretz Yisrael. And throughout Tanakh, the Yarden River becomes a point of border and of definition of Eretz Yisrael. In order to understand this, we need to understand a little bit of what the Yarden is. Lahalacha, the Yarden functions as a border. And this Chavsa Nafkamina with regards to Hilchas Meiser B'Charis. So we'll see this. There's a halachic application of this, and then an agadic application of this, and we're going to see the Rashba on that particular Agadic Gemara in Maseches Baba Basra in a minute. So the Gemara says like this: Amar Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lama Nikra Shema Yarden. Why is the Yarden called Yarden? Says Reb Chia bar Abba in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Sheyorid Midan. Yarden, it's Yorid Midan. It comes from, it descends from the territory of Dan. Now there's a lot of halachic material on this particular statement of the Gemara. Where exactly is Dan? What is the source of the Yarden River? There's a lot to speak about, and this has big nafkaminas with regards to exactly where is considered to be Eretz Yisrael halacha. Amalei Rabbi Abba Rav Ashi Asun Mehasam. So he challenges him. He says, he supports him, yeah? We learned it not from Shir Midan, but we learned it from a pasuk, the pasuk Vayikru Loi Leleshem Dan B'Shem Dan Avim. The pasuk says in Shoftim that they called Leshem Dan after Dan. Right? The tribe of Dan called a particular town that was called, or an area of Eretz Yisrael that was called Leshem. They called that Dan. V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak Leshem Zu Pamias. And Rabbi Yitzchak tells us that Leshem is called Pamias. That's its other name. V'tanya Yotzi Yarden Mimaris Pamias. And we have a tradition that says that the mouth of the Yarden River is called Pamias. So there are two ways of understanding how we know that where the Yarden comes from. Either that's Yored Midan, that's actually the name of it, or alternatively that we know where the mouth of the river is, or where the source of the river is. It's in this area called Leshem. We know that Leshem was in the territory of Dan. Okay. Amar Rav Kahana, Zachruse the Yardenim Imaris Pamias. The male of the Yarden, which means the source, right? The source of the flow of the Yarden River, that's Zachrusa, is in this cave called Pamias. Heicha de Amar Loi Shasina Maim Mimaris Pamias, Itzale Bechule Yardena. And if a person says, I will not drink the waters of the cave of Pamias, it is also for them to drink waters from the whole Yarden River, because that is what they are implying. Okay. This chaps nafkimina for Maisa Behema, because this is the sheet of Rameir early on the daf, that if you have a flock of cattle, some of them born on one side of the Yarden and some born on the other side of the Yarden, they do not join together to make a group of 10 for you to take Maisa Behema from. That's halacha. Okay. Yarden comes from Dan. This is one place that shows up in Shas. Yes?
The Rav just mentioned that Yaakov used the phrases way before Dan was in the picture, and
yes.
Also, didn't Dan get that portion later on?
Yes.
I thought he was lower.
Yes. No, well, no. That is in the Nachla of Dan.
Didn't one of the Shvatim get a second extra portion, and specifically in the north? I thought it was Dan was low, and that gets.
It seems to be that at least this area was original.
Oh. Okay.
But good questions. Hold it for now. The Gemara in Baba Basra, this is in the famous Agadic section of in the middle of Baba Basra, of which many Sifrei Agadata were written. It says the Gemara like this: Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Yarden Yotzi Mimaris Pamias. We have a tradition that the Yarden River is sourced in the cave of Pamias. Tanya Namihachi, we have a brayso like this as well. Yarden Yotzi Mimaris Pamias. Okay, where does it go? That's where it starts. Where does it go? Umahalach b'yama shel Sivchi, and then it flows into this sea called Sivchi. V'yama shel Tiberia, and then into the Sea of Tiberia. What's that called? Probably the Kinneret, right? Umisgalgil v'yored liyam hagadol, and then it flows into the Yam Hagadol, which is
It's usually the Mediterranean.
the Mediterranean.
It doesn't flow there, though.
That's not where it goes, right? Yeah, meaning this is not, at least it does not seem to be geographically accurate. Umisgalgil v'yored ad shemiyah lepir shel Levyasa, and the waters of the Yarden flow into the mouth of the Levyasa. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Yiftach ki agiach Yarden el pihu. This is the pasuk in Eov. Yiftach, he is confident. Why is he confident? Ki agiach Yarden el pihu, because the Yarden is rolling into his mouth. He's confident. Rabbi Bar Ula says, I don't understand. That's not talking about the Leviathan. That pasuk is talking about Behemoths Bahari Aleph. That's talking about the behemoths, right? The beasts of 1,000 hills, the behemoths. We've spoken about fantastical beasts and how to eat them, right? The Sudas Leviathan and the Shara Bar at the end of time. We've spoken about them before. This is one of the Gemaras that deals with these two entities. So explains Elo Amar Rava Barula Emasai Behemoth Bahari Ela Betuchos. When are these beasts secure? When do they feel confident? Bisman Shemagiach Yarden Befil Shel Leviathan. When the waters of the Yarden are flowing into the mouth of the Leviathan, then these beasts are confident they know life is going to be good for them. So some of the Mefarshim explain here. We're not going to go into all of the details, but some of the Mefarshim explain that we have a tradition that the Shar Habar, the behemoth, is not going to be killed until the Leviathan is killed. So for as long as the Leviathan is still drinking, he's happy. He knows that everything is going well. Okay. There are probably hundreds of ways of explaining this Gemara. We're going to learn a Rashba. The Rashba was not just a enormous Talmud Chacham in the world of halacha, but we have a single volume, Masar of Cook collected it all together. It's a single volume, it's a thin volume of the Perushei HaHaggados of the Chidushei Rashba. The Rashba, of course, was a Talmud of the Ramban, which means that he was deeply, deeply familiar with the world of Nistar, of Pnimius HaTorah. And while most of what we learn of the Rashba is not in Sedes HaTorah and in Nistar, he has a very beautiful and unique way of explaining many of these sugyas. In Baba Basra, the only Chidushei Rashba that we have is on this daf, meaning of the Agados. Of course, there's plenty Rashba on the rest of the Masechta. He's referencing the previous Agadata, which talks extensively about the Leviathan and the Shar Habar. And he explains, to recap, before we discuss this particular sugya, says the Rashba as follows. He says, Kvar higati lecha inyan Leviathan. I've already explained to you what Leviathan is. Shiram zulanu by inyan hanefesh. That the Leviathan is a hint in Chazal. It is a coded way of explaining the nefesh. The footnote here points out that this is the kamakis v'haseichel. Right? This is the non-physical aspects of the human being. Right? Nefesh and seichel, that which makes a person aside from the meat suit. Gam higad lecha, I've also explained to you, inyan behemoths. What are the behemoths? Shahari remez lechemer hagufos. The behemoths are talking about the physical makeup of the body. So Leviathan means nefesh, behemoth is guf. And the Yarden is therefore that thing which connects between them. And let's explain what this means. Va'ata gilu lanu makom ikar atzilus hanefesh. And Chazal are revealing to us here the place from which the nefesh is hewn. U'me'ayin nishave ba'adam lenefesh chai, and how it is that a human being comes to be alive. Ve'ad masai yisnahig minag hazman hazeh hagufani, and for how much longer the normative way of the world will continue. That people will be born, that neshamas will be implanted into gufim. That's what this Gemara is talking about. It's a Rashba. He was a very religious Jew. He knew a lot of things, right, Doc? So let's understand. He says, "Va'aktim lecha b'zeh hakdam." I need to preface this with a little bit of an introduction. He says, "Da, you need to know ki nefesh ha'adam hi atzilus netzal mimakar tzor hachayim." You need to know that the life force of a human being is hewn out of that lofty and elevated source, the source of all life, which is the Ribbon Shalom. The Rashba, when he was teaching this, it didn't have the Balatanya. It wasn't yet in print. right? It would take another few hundred years. But the Balatanya arguably made, popularized this notion. It's a Rashba. It's not. It's a Zar. It's in the Kisvei Ari. The Rashba was familiar with the Zar, more or less, meaning not all of it as we know it was published around the same time. Was not familiar with the Kisvei Ari. The Arizal was 200 years later, but was certainly familiar with Seder Satara, that every single Jew, every single neshama is a chelek elokam imah, right? We are a part of the Ribbon Shalom. That's what a neshama is. Okay. He says, Netzal mimukar tzur hachaim. That's the lashon that he uses. Umishtalshel me'atzilus la'atzilus, and goes from place to place of connection to connection. Ad shehigiu el hamakom asher mimenu havaya be'adam lenefesh. And it goes from place to place in the world until it turns into a human being, right? Meaning, for a soul to get from the Ribbon Shalom into our bodies, there is a journey that it takes. The journey that it takes from being carved out of the Ribbon Shalom, so to speak, until it enters into our body. Veda, says the Rashba, you need to know. Turning over onto the next page here. Veda, ki kol makom kibul yikra yam. That every receptacle is called a yam. Ka'amroi, like Chazal tell us, K'mayim liyam mechasim, like water is collected in the yam. Yam means a point of collection. Oitei, you also need to know, Shedas anshe terasenu v'hamekul min hanavim sheyiskimu alav chach me'atalmud, that our Masorah is, which is anshe terasenu, the people of the Torah, v'hamekubal min hanavim, that which we have as a tradition from the Nevi'im, sheyiskimu alav chach me'atalmud, that the Rabbanim of the Talmud agree to. The footnote here is important. That this is mevuar, not she'eskim alav, but mevuar chach me'atalmud, because the Rambam doesn't say like this, and he addresses it in the next piece that he's about to be chalik in the Rambam. What is the thing that is mekubal from the Nevi'im? What is our tradition? Ki yesh la'olam hazeh ketzev uva el tachlis, that the world as we know it will end. Not that the world will end, but the world as we know it will end. Karmram, like Chazal tell us, Shisa Alfred Shnin Havi Alma. There are 6,000 years of this world as we know it. Many, many things like this throughout Chazal. The world as we know it will come to an end. There is an end goal in this. Okay. Ume'ata da, and now you need to know, Ki hayarden nar mamish. You need to know that the Yarden is a real river. That's Aleph. You need to know that this is not solely a mashal. The Yarden is a real river. V'yotze be'emes min ha'mayim min ha'ma'ayon shehu b'maras pamias. And it does actually come from the Yarden. The Yarden does actually come from inside of this cave called Maras Pamias. The Rashi is saying this because the Gemara in Becharis says this little halacha. So this is not just an agarata, it's actually a din. Umisgalgil misham v'yored liyam shel Tveria misham liyam hagadol, and it goes from there to the Yam shel Tveria, and from there to the Yam hagadol. Now, we're not entirely sure about that, but okay. V'lachu zal mashal, but Chazal took this as a mashal. They took it as a mashal. Lirmaz lanu by inyan hanefesh, to explain to us how the soul operates. And Chazal are explaining to us from whence the soul is derived, and where it goes to, and how it ends up in a human being. And Chazal referred to the place that the soul comes from as Maras Pamias. Shesham Ikar Hamayan, which is the source of this stream of neshamas. Umisham mishtal shalosh v'yeredes, and from there the neshama descends. V'kina hamakam arishan shemishtal shalosh sham hanafashas min hamayin yam Tveria. And the first place that the neshamas go to on their journey from where they are created is called Yam Shel Tveria, the Kinneret. V'kina hamakam shemishtal shalosh Sham Oid, and then the soul continues. And from there they fly off, and they turn into a human being. That is called Yam HaGadol, the great collection point of the neshama. That's the guf. Va'inyan. Ki'ila taima b'derech mashal. And what Chazal are telling us through this mashal of the Yarden, she'atzilus hanefesh min haseichel harishon, that the soul coming from the seichel harishon, from the Ribbon Shalom, v'hu la kamayan, which is the source of our neshamas, u'mimenu mishtalshel miseichel l'seichel, and from there it goes from lofty intellectual place to lofty intellectual place, ad haseichel hapoil, until it enters into our brains, into our minds as a living entity. B'derech mashal shehaseichel hapoil yikra Yam HaGadol, that which allows us to act, the active self, is called Yam HaGadol. Lefi shehayam HaGadol kol hanaros nimshachem elav, because the Yam HaGadol, the great sea, is the great collection point in which all streams connect into the ocean. V'kacha haseichel hapoel b'derech mashal Yam haseichel. And so too, the active intellect, that which animates the human body, is called b'derech mashal Yam haseichel, is the collection point of all intellect. Shekol na'arei haseichel nimshachin elav, all thought flows into the capacity to act on it. Mokem mamen anafoshes yikra Yam HaGadol, and the place that the soul stands in this world is called Yam HaGadol. Shehu be'emes Yam HaGadol hu Yam HaChachma. The physical body of people is the Yam HaChachma, is the ocean of all wisdom that all thought flows into. Umisham havia lenefesh, and in that space, when the will of God manifests as a independent neshama, so to speak, and comes into a body that allows a person to think and emote and act and contemplate, that's called the Yam HaGadol. And from there we become a person. And from there it goes into the mouth of the Leviathan. The Leviathan meaning the Seichel. What does this mean? This makes a human being into a living entity. Which is a body and a seichel. Let me just close this door here. Okay. V'zehu yiftach ki agiach Yarden el pihu. And this is yiftach, one can be secure because the Yarden is going into its mouth. Says the Rashba, they challenged the Gemara. I mean, the Gemara issues a challenge here. That pasuk is not talking about the Leviathan. That pasuk is talking about the behemoths, right? V'iksu alav amikra hazeh behemoths ksiv ve'eshiv. And the Gemara responds, when are the bodies feeling secure? When the neshamas are entering into the world of Seichel. Which means for how much longer will this world be the way that it is? For how much longer will this world continue to be as it is? Such that it will be a generation coming and a generation going. For how much longer will the world continue? How much longer is the world going to be as it is? Which will be for as long as the Yarden, which is the flow of neshamas from Hashem into Seichel in this world, into abstract souls. For as long as that flow continues, this flow will continue. From the moment of Olam Haba, right? From the moment in time that we arrive at that place that we refer to now as Olam Haba, the world will cease to exist in this way. And from then on, it will no longer operate in the same physical way. Rather, tzaddikim will be sitting crowns on their heads and enjoying from the radiance of the Shekhinah. This, says the Rashba, is the side of this Gemara. Let's understand here. What the Rashba has told us is the Yarden River has its mouth, its origin, in this secret cave in the area of Dan. It flows into this world, whatever that means, the stops and stations that the neshama takes, and it arrives in a physical body. This process of the flow of the Yarden will not continue forever. It will stop. Now we can start to understand that the flow of the world the way that it is ceases at some point in time. Now, the obvious connection to Yehoshua is that the flow of the world as it is supposed to stop. When Klal Yisrael, when Knesset Yisrael enters into Eretz Yisrael, that is the beginning of the world being a different world. It's supposed to change. The world now turns into a different world. Now, this was temporary because it stopped for a moment. And then the goal of Klal Yisrael was to get to that point in time. But we haven't gotten there yet. But what Yehoshua does is demonstrate that. Yehoshua demonstrates what it means that there is a stop of the world being the way that it was, that the physical world as we know it no longer operates the way that it is, not with new souls coming into the world and coming back and Gilgulim and all sorts of everything. No, Nigmar. This is now L'sakein Olam Malchus Shakai. The world is the way that Hashem wants it to be. There is now no longer need for new enterprises in the world. We've reached the end goal of what the world is supposed to be in this iteration. We've, in the words of the way that the Svarna describes it, we've gone back to Gan Eden. We're back to where we need to be. Now, this mashal of the Yarden, the Maharal in Chidusha Agados, points out that the Yarden is unique. He says, the Yarden is unique amongst all rivers. The Yarden is the chief amongst the rivers that surround Eretz Yisrael. It is the border of Eretz Yisrael, right? The Yarden is the eastern border of Eretz Yisrael. It is that body of water that surrounds it. It is unique amongst the other rivers in that its origin is well hidden. Now, the Rashba explained to us the mashal that the Yarden is hidden, comes directly from the Rebbeinu Shalom. It comes from this hidden cave of Pamias. This is a big yisoid that the Maharal is going to reveal to us here. This explains that the Yarden has an immense and lofty property. The higher something is, the more hidden is its source. Now, this is Rabbeinu Bachya, by the way. The Rabbeinu Bachya points this out in Parshas Emor, talking about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the most hidden Yom Tov in the Torah. Right? There's almost nothing written about Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. Torah doesn't tell you anything about it. Torah tells you that this is like Yom Trua and Yom Zichron Trua. All the things that we say about Rosh Hashanah are not in the Torah. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, because the loftier something is, the more hidden it is. And
Yom Kippur is described in much more detail.
So what?
Yom Kippur typically is thought of as loftier than Rosh Hashanah.
So
it's described in considerably greater detail.
So it is higher in Kedusha, but it is not loftier. What's the difference? Meaning, in the world of Kedusha, which means that which is we can appreciate as being transcendent from us, we can stare at it from afar. Right? You can describe Yom Kippur from afar. But you cannot describe Rosh Hashanah. The side of Rosh Hashanah is much deeper. Because there are secrets and there are secrets. I don't remember how you said it in Yiddish, but there's like there's a Yiddish phrase that a secret is something that you tell to one person at a time, right? Secrets are things that you like, did you hear that? That's one kind of secret. But then there's other kinds of secrets that you cannot describe at all. Like, how much do I love my children? I don't know. Yeah, you want me to start describing that? That's impossible. Meaning, no matter how much I will describe that to you, it's not describable. It defies capturing within language. So, the desire for God to create humanity, which is Rosh Hashanah, that defies our capacity to comprehend or to explain. The higher something is, the loftier something is, which is this inyan, the more it is nistar. It says that's why Chazal define the Yarden as being very, very mysteriously hidden. The comes from a hidden place. And it also flows eventually into the mouth of the Leviathan. This notion of Leviathan, so Maharal has a lot of Mahalchim on, is also something which is lofty and mysterious. This is why the Navi says, and we'll get there when we get there, that Naaman, when he has tzaras, has to dunk in the Yarden River. That which is revealed can become tameh, and that which is hidden cannot become tameh. This is a din in Hilchos Tumah and Tara. Like Chazal tell us, "Ein makom beis hastarim mekabel tumah." Something that is hidden is not mekabel tumah. You know this from the laning of Parshas Parah. Torah tells us that anything that is sealed within, if there's a mace in a room, and something is sealed within a jar in the room that the mace is in, the thing that is sealed is still tahar. It's hidden. If it's hidden, it is tahar. Kvar bi'arnu zeh shamar HaKosov have na yadcha b'chikecha v'nishra b'mitzarasa kodem shehayotzi yasa misham. Why the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, if you want to heal the tzaras on your hand, what should you do? Hide it. That which is hidden is not mekabel tumah. You heal from tumah in a place that's hidden. That which the Gemara says that it goes into the mouth of the Leviathan. Now this is important. Everything that exists in this world, by definition, is lacking. Right? Everything is lacking means everything has need. There is no such thing as something that is perfect that is not lacking in the world that we live in the lower world. From itself. Ad sheloi yehi tzarich kiyum, because everything needs something in order to continue to be sustained. V'davar hamekayim zulasai, and that thing that sustains something else, nikra, is called Paranasal, that which is mefarnes it, that which sustains it. V'afilu im einay davar gashmi, even if it is not a physical thing, kevan shehu ashlamasai nikra zeh Paranasal, even if it's a non-physical entity, right? Meaning even if it's a psychological or emotional or intellectual reality, that which allows it to continue is called the parnasa of it. It's mefarnes that. V'im hamekabel hu gashmi, mekabel davar gashmi. V'im eina mekabel gashmi, yushlam davar bilti gashmi. Vein tzarich larich. That which is physical needs physical things to fill it in. That which is intellectual, psychological, mysterious needs mysterious things to fill it in. This, by the way, the Balatanya uses as a mashal to describe the conundrum that people have expressing and explaining godliness. It says, people sometimes say, I don't understand this about God. So he says that's the same thing as saying, this thought is so deep, I can't touch it with my hand. It's a nonsensical statement. Thoughts and hands have nothing to do with each other, right? For us to say, I intellectually am struggling to comprehend something about God, is the same as saying, I cannot touch this thought with my hand, because it's just the wrong kelim. So he's explaining that in order for the Levyasan to be filled, it needs to be filled from a place that is exceedingly mysterious. All of this is saying that that thing which is called the Yarden, which is the boundary into Eretz Yisrael, means that crossing over the Yarden is crossing over all of the incredibly lofty, very deep, and very profound ways that the world operates. The world as we know it today operates. There are rules of the world that we live in. We exist in this world of things working the way that they do. Crossing over that, crossing beyond that, means going to a place where that doesn't work the same way. Eventually, the Yarden will stop. That thing called Yarden, the flow of new neshamas coming into this world in the way that they do, will stop. And at that point in time, the walls surrounding Eretz Yisrael, which is called the Yarden, will fall. What Chazal explain is that eventually all of Yerushalayim will be Eretz Yisrael, and all of Eretz Yisrael will be the whole world. That which is only appreciable inside of Eretz Yisrael will become appreciable in the rest of the world. Meaning, the world operates in one way, and it will then begin to operate in another way. The Navi explains to us, we'll get there much later on, to expand the place of the Beis HaMikdash, that one day Yerushalayim will no longer be surrounded by walls. We just had Asar B'Tevis, right? Asar B'Tevis is the day that we mourn the siege of Yerushalayim. Siege of Yerushalayim means that, quite literally, they surrounded Yerushalayim. They made it impossible for Yerushalayim to be expansive. That thing called Yerushalayim became contained. Eventually, the walls of you need walls in order to protect yourself. But at some point in time, when you don't need to protect yourself, those walls come down, and then that thing called Yerushalayim can be expansive, can grow beyond where it's at. That's Yerushalayim becomes the whole of Eretz Yisrael. And Eretz Yisrael, when the Yarden stops, becomes the whole world. So there is this process of crossing over the way that the world was to the way that Klal Yisrael are going to be operating in the world. And a hint, a foreshadowing of what is yet to come, which is the cessation of the Yarden, the Olam Kamin Haganai, that the world is not going to be the way that it was. We'll show you just one thing inside, and then we'll discuss just a little bit more. What does it mean the way that the world operates outside of Eretz Yisrael versus the way that the world operates inside of Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara tells us that while they were in the Yarden, Yehoshua has a conversation with the people. This is the Gemara in Tzota that we saw before. The Gemara in Tzota on Lamed Daled is where all of the Gemaras, all of the Mamari Chazal, or at least a lot of them, in the Bavli about crossing over the Yarden. Yeah.
Side note, then there's a whole discussion in Sanhedrin about the number of men needed for the expansion of the walls of Yerushalayim.
Yes, we'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah, because there's a story of the walls of Yericho coming down and the walls of Yerushalayim coming up. There's a lot of relationship between Yerushalayim and Yericho. Yeah, we'll get there. Yehoshua has this conversation with the Jewish people in the Yarden River as they are crossing, with the Aaron splitting the Yarden, ceasing the flow of normal operation of existence. While they were in the Yarden, Yehoshua says to them, "Do know al ma'atem oivrim es hayarden? For what are you crossing over the Yarden? Al menas shetayrishu es yoshvei haaretz, so that you will inherit those that are settling on the land. Shetayrishu yoshvei haaretz mipneichem, from before you." Right? Tarishu are the two from the lashon of Yerusha, or Tarishu to plow them out. Shenema v'hayrashtem es kol yoshvei haaretz, that you're going to send them out mipneichem, from before you. Im atem oisim kain, if you do this mutav, good. V'im lav, and if you don't, baim maim v'shaitfim oischem, then the water will come and will drown you. My oischim oisi v'shaitfim oisichem, my oisichem oisi v'eschem. So what the Gemara says, what does it mean, oisichem? So it means oisi v'eschem, me and you. That's how the pasuk says. Right? Oisichem. If you cross over the Yarden, if you agree that you will take control of Eretz Yisrael, good. And if not, these waters are going to come and drown you. Now, there is a similar conversation, famously, at Har Sinai. Right? What's the conversation of Har Sinai? If you accept the Torah, good. And if not, you're done. But this conversation happens every single time a human being is born. It's a famous Gemara in Nida. What does the Gemara say in Nida? When a person comes into this world, Malach comes and smacks you on the mouth. And all the Torah that you learned in utero is forgotten. Sin is crouching by the door. You begin to forget everything as soon as you leave the womb. But they don't let you leave until you take an oath. They make you take an oath. To you will swear, will bow every knee, will swear every tongue. That every knee will bow to you. That's the day of death. Everybody bows to Hashem as they go into the grave. Swear to you every tongue. What's that? Yom HaLeida. That's the day of birth. Shenemar naki chafaim uvar levav asher lo nasal shav nafshay v'lo nishbat lemima. The one who is pure of heart, that has not sworn falsely. What is this oath that you take before you enter this world? What is the oath that they make you swear? Ti tzadik v'al ti rasha. Be a tzaddik, don't be a rasha. And even if the whole world says to you, you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself a rasha. And know that Hashem is tahar, and those that serve him are tahar. And the neshama that is giving you is tahar. If you hold and guard onto its purity, Good, and if not, I'll take it from you. What's the oath? Do the thing that you need to do, otherwise you're done. Which means either justify your existence or it's not worth existing. Every neshama comes into this world to justify its existence, to do something that it needs to do. That's what a neshama is supposed to do here. And if we don't do the thing that we are supposed to be doing, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, this is better not to. It's better that you not be here and mess this whole project up. This happens on an individual level, and this happens at a national level at Har Sinai, and happens once again at a national level, crossing over the Yarden. At Har Sinai, that was a national acceptance of the mission of the Jewish people. And crossing over the Yarden, as we've noted before, is the practical application of that mission, is bringing that into reality. This pasuk, by the way, where do we say the pasuk all the time? Aleinu, which is written by Yehoshua, right? Now, this connection, by the way, between this promise of Yehoshua and this promise that the Malach makes to every person, this was not my connection. This I saw in the parish of on the Agaritas of David Isser Cook, Rav Cook's great nephew. He's a big Rav and Makubal in Eretz Yisrael. He makes this point. He says, "V'hu ke'ein din shel im ein ata meshamar l'neshama ani lat mimcha." Shebeledas haneshama la'olam hanal. When there's a relationship between when the soul enters into the world, to what Yehoshua says to them, he says, therefore, and we're going to get there probably next week, and just as a baby is given a bris milah as soon as it comes into the world, kach nimalu Yisrael al yidei Yehoshua b'viyas la'aretz b'teres milas haklal kamabur. There's a bris milah that the entirety of Klal Yisrael undergoes just as they cross the Yarden, which means that the process of crossing over the Yarden is the entry of the neshama of the Jewish people into the world called Eretz Yisrael. Which means that the stop in the Yarden also functions as a birthing process. This is quite literally a break in the water. The Klal Yisrael now is entering into Eretz Yisrael. Now, we have a couple of minutes. What is the purpose of Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael? What is so different? So we'll just say very briefly a Hagdama. Surah Ben Abachian, we're not going to see it inside now, just very, very briefly. We'll start from this point next week. Throughout the Chumash and throughout Tanakh, there are references to Elohim Acherim. What are Elohim Acherim? Literally means other gods, right? The Torah doesn't call them false gods. The Torah calls them other gods. Now, obviously, it's a monotheistic religion. We're not saying that they are other gods. But the Lashon of Elohim, the Haksava Kabbalah points out, quotes 8 different perushim on exactly what the name Elohim means. The Tzad HaShaveh of all of it is that Elohim means power. Power. Which is why the Gemara points out in a number of places that the word Elohim could either be Kodesh, that's Elohim, referring to the Rebbeinu Shalom, or could be Elohim Tumah, right? Elohim Achirim, other gods, or Chol, judges, right? Yavo ad ha Elohim, they should come to the judges. Power, they are those things that establish order. Rashi tells us in Bereshis that Elohim, the name Elohim means Midas Hadin, the attribute of justice. What does Midas Hadin mean? So we'll take you back to high school Talmud class. The Gemara will, from time to time, talk about something that comes min hadin, like daya lavoi min hadin liyas kanidon. What does daya lavoi min hadin liyas kanidon mean? So a kal v'chomer is referred to as din. What's a kal v'chomer? I think there's a fancy Latin name for it. A fortiori, right? Right? That's a kal v'chomer. I don't even know how to explain that in English. Right? A kal v'chomer means that there is a easy case that we know the law for, and a more severe case that we do not know the law for. Right? So the example that they would always say to us in yeshiva, I remember this from high school, is that somebody falls off a 4-story building and breaks their leg. We know that. That happened. Somebody fell off a 4-story building and broke their leg. So somebody falls off a 20-story building, what could we say about them? At the very least, we can say that they will break their leg. More than that, we don't know. We don't know. But we can certainly say that they will break their leg. Right? Why can't we say more than that? Means it's enough. Lavoi min hadin from din means the rule. We'll explain what that means in a moment. Liyas kanidon, to be like the thing that we're comparing to. Din in this case means logic. Logically, we can derive to this point. More than that, we cannot. That's assumptions. That's postulating. That's a guess. We don't know what will happen beyond breaking a leg. We know that you will, at the very least, break something. Right? It could be more, but we don't know. We don't know. Din means logic. Din means logic. The logical way of operating. This is what Chazal refer to as the natural order of the world. Cause and effect. There are many causes, there are many effects. And every place in the world, every country, every city, every civilization, prioritizes particular causes over other causes. Right? In America, the mover and shaker of all things is money. That's Pashat, right? That is the Elohim Achirim of America. That is the thing that people chalk up to the cause of all things.
And the irony is it's printed on the dollar bill.
Correct. But the state. God, we trust this thing, right? This is the thing. Meaning, it's not to say that they don't believe in a primary being. It means that the way that people operate is by giving credence to a particular power that exists. That's called Elohim Achirim. Everywhere in the world has their Elohim Achirim. Sometimes there are multiple causes. But whatever the primary cause is of that society, that civilization, the Kamanim explain that that's called Elohim Achirim. Now, of course, the Rambam writes at the beginning of Hilchos Avodas Kochavim that spiraled, historically, that has spiraled out of control into people worshipping all sorts of things. Meaning the sun as a primary cause. It is, right? All energy that we have on planet Earth comes from the sun, right? The sun is a primary cause of the entirety of the food chain and energy, and that's where, right? When you eat steak, you are getting energy from the sun. Now, it's come through many hishtalsheluyos, right? It went into grass, and then from grass into cows, and then from cows into me, right? It's gone through some pretty intense chemical processes in order to get from there to there. But I move as a result of energy from the sun. The sun is a big-time cause. Worshipping that means Elohim Achirim. It is a power that is it is a cause. It kicks off a chain of many, many, many intense reactions, very powerful, very important reactions. That's called Elohim Achirim. For some people, that's called money. And in the primitive understanding of the way that Hashem wants the world to work, the old school Avodah Zaros is everything is in the natural world. The Chiddush of Greece was that you can make gods out of concepts, not just physical things, which is why Greece was Mechadesh, the idea of a god of love, not just a god of war, right? You can chalk up the cause of this is the desire for war, and the cause of this is the desire for love, right? The Greeks had causes, root causes that drove society that were not natural. They were intellectual, they were emotional. That was their Elohim Achirim, and they had a big Suda with all of these gods, right? That was called Olympus, where all of these various powers fought out with each other. And when ancient people used to fight with each other, it was not just them fighting with each other, it was the cause that they worshipped, fighting each other. Not much has changed in the world. We just have more sophisticated language to refer to it. Yes?
Maybe less.
Well, maybe less sophisticated. Maybe could quite well be. Meaning, when you talk about the Cold War as being a war between communism and capitalism, so in America, capitalism is a god, and in Russia, communism is a god. Meaning, the cause of all things Russian is communism, and the cause of all things American is capitalism. And then you have machloksim in how to interpret those things, those primary causes of this particular society. Those are called Elohim Achirim. This is why Chazal say, Kol hadar b'chutz la'aretz ki'ilu ein lo Eloka. It's as if they don't have God. Or, the less sanitized version of it is, Kol hadar b'chutz la'aretz ovid avodah zara b'tahara. They are serving other gods with purity. Right? Hey, I'm Jewish. The example that I've given a number of times before is you roll into the kosher Dunkin' Donuts this time of year and you hear jingle bells on the radio. Right? What does that mean? Yeah, okay, I'm eating kosher, but at the end of the day, the culture that I am in serves something else, which means that I live within a world serving something else. Everywhere in the world serves something else. It's the reality of the world. Now, you can see God within that, and many people, Baruch Hashem, do. But it means that the perspective that we have of God is filtered through the perspective of the society that we live in, always. We don't have an unadulterated viewpoint of service of Hashem, because it is being filtered through the cultural lenses of everywhere that we are and everywhere that we've lived. Crossing over the Yarden into Eretz Yisrael means all of those things stop. They stop. We only look at HaKadosh Baruch Hu as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the primary cause of all things. Not capitalism, not communism, not Republicans, not Democrats, not money, not power, not love, not war, not hate, not sun, not moon, Ribbon Shalom. Cause of all things. That's the goal. The Yarden stopping means the ceasing of two things. The normative operation of the world, like the Rashi explained to us. But it also means the expansion of Eretz Yisrael ultimately. That at some point in time, when the world ceases to operate normally, that will mean that the whole world will not have Elohim Achirim. There will only be one cause of all things, and that's called the Ribbon Shalom. Living in accordance with that value system is ultimately the goal of coming into Eretz Yisrael. And B'ezras Hashem, next week, we will pick up from what exactly our understanding of the Ribbon Shalom is within the world of Eretz Yisrael. What are the promises that Hashem makes to Klal Yisrael entering into Eretz Yisrael? This, B'ezras Hashem, and more we will see next time we meet. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.